So shall we do Bullitt and Grand Prix? Are you
Yeah, I'm good to do that.
so reminder, spoilers for Bullitt and Grand Prix. Bullitt is from 1968 and Grand Prix is from 1966. Criterion had them listed as sort of a double feature. They do these sort of suggestions as double features as one of their, programming themes. And I for some reason I decided I wanted to do this one. And Bullitt stars Steve McQueen. He is a detective, and he has to babysit a mobster who from Chicago. It takes place in San Francisco. He's babysitting a mobster from Chicago because this mobster is going to be a witness in a trial that a particular senator is like pushing through and having to do. Except that in the first act, you're barely into the movie, and that mobster gets shot in the face, or in the shoulder and the face, and then dies not long after. And which leaves Steve McQueen to be like, what's going on here? Because something isn't right. And what continues is essentially like a French Connection style, almost, just sort of not really French Connection, but just like
it's a thriller.
A thriller.
It has overlap with French Connection, I would say, in the action.
Yeah. So it's a thriller, and then Grand Prix is I guess it's a kind of a.
Although Bullitt came before French Connection, so French Connection is 71. So
that's right. So that's interesting.
French Connection has a Bullitt style.
Bullitt style. There you go. But Grand Prix is I don't know. It's a sport. It's not a sport film, but it's about the Grand Prix Formula One racing circuit. So I guess that almost makes it an event film or something.
It is kind of.
Yeah, except that it's kind of epic in scope because it's Technicolor and just the way it's directed. But it stars an actor whose name I don't know.
Yves Montand.
Yves Montand, James Garner, and Eve Marie Saint. Or is it Eva? It's Eve Marie Saint, right?
Eva Marie Saint.
Eva Marie Saint. And other people. In
some interesting other people. Okay, let me really quickly. It has Antonio Sabato, who I feel like is at this point more famous for being Antonio Sabato Jr.'s dad. It has Jessica Walter, who most people know as the mom from Arrested Development, but she's quite young in this by comparison. And it has Toshiro Mifune in some awkward scenes where he seems to be dubbed in English. And then
nobody had any clue what to do with him.
The English-speaking world didn't know what to do with Toshiro Mifune, it feels like. And so those are kind of the other big ones you skipped over.
Yes, and the movie essentially follows 3 racers and 3 arcs that follow these racers, which includes each of them has a woman in their life. So Jean-Pierre Sarti is an older driver who's won a world championship and many Grand Prix and is not sure what he's doing with his life and is very tired of racing, except he still has to race. And then James Garner plays an American who really just wants to win, and that's all he's interested in, except that he's also kind of a mess, except it's not really his fault. And then Scott Stoddard I forget who plays Scott Stoddard.
His name is Brian Bedford.
Right. And he is a British driver who's been around for, I think, a little longer than the James Garner character, but he's won a few Grand Prix, and at the very beginning is in an accident because of James Garner. It's
as people who don't understand racing, I can't really tell you.
Yeah.
I thought that crash was excellent. I thought that was amazing. The crash
is great. Yeah, the crashes in it are all really well done.
I love the shot. There was a shot, basically, it was like, what's that, Hardcore Henry or whatever, that movie that was entirely like first person?
Yeah, Hardcore Henry.
It was just our arms on a steering wheel as it goes like through some hay and over a...
Yeah, no, there's some really neat cinematography in this. Some really neat design. But anyway, so Scott Stodder's arc is that he's horribly injured at the beginning of the season, and he's trying to get back, and he's really committed and willful and wants to get back into racing. And then Paul, the other guy's arc, is that he just wants to win, kind of in spite of everything, or because, I don't know, he just wants to win, I guess.
Paul?
James Garner.
Yeah, you mentioned him, though.
Oh, I did. I forgot.
Yeah.
I didn't even know if I covered his arc. Anyways, those are the things. And then stuff happens. There's some drama, and it's a lot of Formula One racing, and it's really more interesting. It's a movie really more about the filmmaking than about the story.
Yeah, okay, so can I take, because I feel like you skipped something in Bullitt, which is it is most famous for the car chase.
Well, I was doing the synopsis of the story. Yeah?
Right, but this is why there are two, because really...
The reason they're paired is because they're...
almost nothing in common.
Yes, the reason they're paired for the Criterion is because of the cars.
The cars.
The racing.
And it's just one car scene, but like the car he's driving is... I don't care about cars at all. Theo and I actually share a car. And at one point I was supposed to like go with him to check out cars. And I flaked because I just find it stressful and I hate it. And I just need a car that goes and stops.
You better appreciate that I got the car, because I also don't care about cars.
You kind of had an opinion though. You were like looking at like, do you want this one or that one or a new one or an old one? And I was like, go, stop, turn, AC. That's it. We're good.
You're like a 1 and I'm like a 3.
Yeah, that's fine, but I am a 1. And I have to say I appreciated the cars in Grand Prix more, honestly. Yeah. But let's talk Bullitt first, because they're two kind of different films.
Okay.
I don't know what to talk about them in relation to one another that much.
Well, so here's my thing, here's my thing in my head, which is like, I've heard about Bullitt for years. I've heard about it in film school. It's popped up every so often since then. Steve McQueen is so cool. Great cars, blah, blah, blah. And I watched the movie and I'm like, okay, I get it that the hype was probably incorrectly told to me. There is one car chase in that whole movie. You see cars in other shots, and that one car chase in Bullitt is glorious. It is a great scene. I understand why we talk about it. You know, I grew up with that car chase in Born Identity, which is really good, and I really like it. And I'm not sure which is better. It doesn't matter. And I get why you go to Born Identity being like, there's a great car chase in it. But Bullitt is a crime thriller movie, and most of the movie is concerned with being a crime thriller, and no one ever pitched that to me. So I'm watching Bullitt, and it's like, it's a crime thriller. Why was this all about the car? And that car chase is great. I want to reiterate, it is a great car chase.
There's a little car porn in it, though. Like, even when he's not chasing, it's like, we're going to see him drive to every location. Like, you know, bad movies do that. I recently watched a bad movie where it's just like, how did they get here? Oh, good, it's in a car. Like, you just see every arrival in every car. But in this case, it's like clearly because it's about the car. Like,
yes, well, and there's a little setup, I think, in that. Like, the reason we see him driving everywhere is like it's setting up just cars, and also setting up San Francisco as being a terrifying city to drive in. I've driven there, I think, twice.
I've driven there with a stick shift, man. Not in a while, but.
God, that's miserable.
I love the story of our mom when she was like 16 driving with a friend, and she didn't have her license yet, but the friend got stuck on a hill, so she like got in and got them going again.
Those streets are just terrifying. Anyways, but so that's my weird takeaway, and I actually enjoyed Bullitt, but my weird takeaway, one of my weird takeaways, is that car chase is great. It's also a crime thriller. World needs to think about it as more than just a car chase. I don't know. It was sold to me wrong.
I've watched it several times and I never remember the plot at all. And I realized it falls into the same bucket as like Dirty Harry and French Connection and stuff, where it's like, I don't really care about it that much because I don't know. I like buddy cop films because you have these buddy dynamics and you have these characters and these French Connection and Bullitt and Dirty Harry, I mean, they have characters, but it's just like, Harry doesn't have an arc, you know, Bullitt doesn't have much of an arc. The French Connection guys don't have much of an arc. Like, and so it's fine. What interests me more at this point is someone needs to tell me if they've seen strong San Francisco films that aren't crime thrillers, because all the San Francisco films are cop detective thriller film. And there's this weird thing where it's like, if we're in San Francisco, it's going to be detectives. If we're in New York, it's a rom-com. It's like, obviously that's not the full story, not every single film. But it's weird how certain cities, like when I was watching all those rom-coms, of course, some of them took place, but it was a majority New York. Like so many of the rom-coms were in New York. Sometimes they were in LA, sometimes they were in London. Usually they were in New York. It was kind of like,
I think The Princess Bride takes place in San Francisco.
The Princess Bride?
No, sorry, the Princess
Diaries. Yeah.
Takes place in San Francisco.
It's like The Princess Bride doesn't take place in a major city. Well, what's that? Yeah, no, of course there's other. Full House takes place in San Francisco. There's things that take place in San Francisco that aren't.
It was just something I've watched recently
But it's also something about, even if, we collated all the movies, like what are the ones that people remember, like that take place? So I just kind of think it's interesting how San Francisco became this like cop location. CoverGirl took place in San Francisco. Hitchcock was always putting things up there. So obviously it doesn't really, but I don't know. I mean,
Hitchcock
I guess
movies were mostly thrillers. So
yeah, Vertigo has some.
I think he's a cop too.
Yeah, I think he's like a detective. So I find that really interesting personally. Again, I don't find the car stuff that interesting. I've always had trouble with Jacqueline Bisset's character. She's the girlfriend. She seems startled to find herself dating a cop in the middle of the film and really upset that people get murdered. And it just was like, there's a way of doing that is good. I didn't feel like the movie did it very well. And she keeps wandering around life with no pants on, which, makes me sound like I'm 60, but she's like at her work in what appears to be a long shirt and nothing else. And she's got nice legs.
It's the fashion of the 60s.
And no shaming. Women should wear what they want. It just cracks me up because I'm a 60-year-old woman and it looks to me like she forgot to put pants on.
You're not 60. It also, so I have a couple of things. First is, since you're on Jacqueline Bisset, I don't know if that's how you say her name, but the only other movie I've seen her in, I think, is The Deep. And in that movie, she also mostly doesn't wear pants, and is wearing a wet T-shirt at some point, and that's mostly what the movie is famous for.
Yeah,
and I love the body, male or female. I'm partial to the female form, but the male, again, as I mentioned, I really like floppy penis on screen. And I suppose I shouldn't say female or male because you can have boobs and be male and all this. So I'm getting things mixed up, but I like the biologically female form that involves boobs and bush and vagina, and I enjoy the male form, the biologically male form, which is penis. Anyways, those sex pieces, anyways, whatever gender, no gender, just those sex pieces.
Right. You like bodies.
I like bodies. Don't care what the gender attached to the body is. I like bodies.
Right.
And Jacqueline Bisset has a nice body.
Yeah.
But like you, I tend to think that Bullitt, I like movies that have plot more than you. I like plot-driven movies more than you often. And in this case, the movie never really tries to have any character, but it also isn't really hitting you over the head necessarily with things. Like there's that one scene where Jacqueline Bisset suddenly knows that Steve McQueen is a cop, even though they've been together for a while.
Yeah.
And I like that. I appreciate that there's this archetypal thing that it's doing. It's not unique. It's not particularly good. It's more just like the movie needs something to hang its characters and story on. And I wouldn't describe it as good, but it's not bad. The one thing I would describe as good, which you hadn't mentioned yet, but I think you also like, is that she doesn't, at the end, she's with him still, which is unusual. And I like that in a way that makes it feel like this is a day in the life of Steve McQueen's character. And I kind of like that that's kind of all you're getting, is that this is a day in the life of Steve McQueen's character.
Well, and I like that he seems to genuinely really like her. Like he seems, like I got the sense from like the scene where they're out to dinner or something, like he's very focused on her. Like it felt like he really loves her. And I like that. And I like that she sticks around. I mean, the thing is, I think cops do have you know, hard jobs that are, I mean,
Well, it's
there's a lot
interesting.
of
Yeah, I was
there's a
going to
lot of
say,
issues with cops right now. So not getting into it, but I think divorce is an issue with people who work those kind of hours, and it's just that the lines she's given are very like,
yeah.
I'm woman, I don't get that you deal with hard. It just was like very, very clunky, very clunky.
Yeah, and we should move on to Grand Prix, but I have at least I have my last thing to say about Bullitt, which is actually which is about the cop nature, which is there's this call. Well, I don't know what it is, but I've seen things going by in the few social times I look at social media or the few things I watch as far as like listening to people review movies and talk about movies about how we need to review and reassess how we handle cops in media and also just
Right.
how we involve cops in the movies, which is less like which is, you know, tertiary to the whole defund the police or abolish the police or any of that. But well, it's a part of it, but it's not the main thrust of it. But it's interesting because the more I watch these movies like Beverly Hills Cop we recently watched or Bullitt, certainly a lot of these movies romanticize the police, and Bullitt is no exception. And I'm, you know, not fond of that at the moment. I don't have a nuanced view of this because I don't know as much as I should. But you know, I am definitely critical now more of like how the movies romanticize the police, especially, and how they pretty much never seem to look at, you
Right.
know, some of the stuff that is now, you know, the reason we want to abolish the police and defund the
Right.
police and change how it is that we have public services, how we use our public services, which is police and
Mhm.
firemen and social workers and all that. And Bullitt is a movie like Beverly Hills Cop that makes me think like, you know, there's very few cop movies, even the ones that romanticize cops, where I feel like the movie is like, and the cops are a completely safe and well-structured organization.
Right.
Every movie, I think I'm sure there are movies out there, but the movies that jump to my mind about cops, all the way from In the Heat of the Night to here, none of them suggest that the system works. In fact, all
Mhm.
of them include an element of how the system doesn't work. Now,
Mhm.
TV and Law and Order and all of that is different,
Right.
and I think people watch TV more than you know I do, and think about it in terms of these cop shows and like the show Cops and all of that, which is you know reality TV anyways, but is all different. But in the movies, I was just realizing a lot of movies, and it's not the main thrust, but like in Bullitt, he has to go around the senator. The cops are kind of shifting the rules. You know,
Mhm.
in the heat of the night, it's one, you know, it is specifically about race and about how one cop is trying to like adhere to the book. It's almost like Sidney Poitier's character is trying to do the good thing, which is almost in competition with Steiger's character. So it's not so much about the system, but about like strict systematic issues, but is about the white, you know, the racial tensions in that. And then like Beverly Hills Cop, you know, he's not supposed to be doing any cop work and is doing cop work. So there's this weird element, and I wonder if there's more scholarship on it about how even like there just isn't the most cop movies, even the ones that romanticize cops, like Dirty Harry too, don't seem to suggest that there's something wrong with the system. So I'm wondering if there's always been an undercurrent of that. Like, you know, we say like, no, great, you know, we have when we talk about something like Gone with the Wind, like, oh, it was loved when it first came out, and we just ignore the fact that there were protests. I wonder if
Yeah.
like there's this subversive element in cop movies that is not maybe even there intentionally, but upon a relook with sort of knowledge of where we are currently, like, is there actually this thing through history? Because
Yeah.
like a lot of the crime noirs also that I've watched contain an element where like a lot of them are from the side of the villain of the criminals, but like that suggests that the cops are doing shady things and the system doesn't really work. So just a thought.
No, it's an interesting thought. I know Dirty Harry got a lot of people disagreed with it, the way it depicted the cop. I also think things aren't very good at being self-reflexive of the time they're in. So it would almost be more interesting to see someone do the 70s style cop movie now,
Yeah,
but with more of a perspective on what was actually going on than
yeah,
the narrative they kind of wanted to put forth. So
yeah.
Grand Prix,
So Grand Prix, and again, there's not a lot to say in comparison other than that, Bullitt is like, I guess, muscle cars from the 60s.
They had 4 wheels.
Excellent. And there's only one scene in Bullitt. Meanwhile, Grand Prix has many racing scenes in it. Indeed, they're all pretty fabulous, the racing scenes. They're really part of the movie.
We had just watched one other nope, I'm going to say Jerry Bruckheimer, and that is completely wrong. I'm going to say... Frankenheimer is the name I want to use. Earlier this week, which was Seconds, and he's definitely a filmmaker, camera, he likes doing interesting filmmaking visually.
Yeah, he's interested in the visuals. I'm not
convinced he likes putting characters in his movies, but he does really he builds a lot of story out of camera work and editing.
Yeah, which probably means he's more my style than yours. At least, I think I've liked both Grand Prix and Seconds more than you.
I think so. I wouldn't say I really actively disliked either. I did find this, here's a Wikipedia quote. So Bowsley Crowther was a big critic. I don't really know much about critics. I think he may have been problematic, maybe not. I apologize.
I think you also pronounced his name wrong, but that's okay.
Bosley?
Bosley. I've heard other people say it, but I don't, yeah.
How do other people say it?
I think it's Bosley Crothers.
Yes.
Anyways.
So he complimented the filmmaking, and then he's concluded the big trouble with the picture is that the characters and their romantic problems are stereotypes and cliches. You come away with the feeling that you've seen virtually everything there is to see in Grand Prix racing, except the real guys who drive those killer cars. And I would say that is it's almost like 2 movies. You have these amazing shots of just these funny little coffin-shaped, speed racer cars, and the courses they go on, which are really interesting. They go through cities, they go through different cities, they, crowds gather to watch them. Yeah, there's the last race is at that place that has the road that actually is at a 45-degree angle or something, so they can really speed around the track. And in the middle there's this what you would think is the thing I wouldn't like that actually is probably the part I like. There's a ballet basically where it's just this music, this symphony, or I don't know classic music that well, but it's light, it's not heavy, it's lighter music, but with cars driving, and they do all kinds of split screen stuff, which made me think this should be paired with the Thomas Crown Affair more, but Criterion probably doesn't have that because of the split screen stuff, because the Thomas Crown Affair is also cars, right?
I haven't seen it.
I think it is. Maybe it's not. And I really dug that. And then you had this other movie happening that was men and their problems with women. And the movie's supposed to focus on these men, but it kind of ends up doing a disservice to both the men and the women by making their relationships so front and center. Because the women, there was an effort in the Eva Marie Saint, all 3 of them really, the Eva Marie Saint's character, the Jessica Walters, is that her name? Sorry, I've already forgotten. Yes, Jessica Walters' character, the Antonio Sabato's love interest. There is an effort for them to have external lives, but because the movie's just about the racing, it really, all their stories are about the men. But then the men's stories become completely about their relationship with the women, instead of Scott Stoddard, the character, has a dead brother. James Garner, just, Yves Montagn's first line is are you tired of racing? And you're like, oh crap. Is that what we're doing here? So it's
one of those things. Right afterwards, you mentioned, you were like, well, none of those women, I think you said something like, well, the women characters are pretty flat. And, we started to talk about it, and we were like, well, the men characters are really flat too.
Right. And with so it just makes giving the men characters, those women character love interests, just it's so flat. Like it's just not very interesting. You kind of know where everything's going, and you can predict the end, and it just feels very unepic. It feels
the movie, yeah. So
I mean, From Here to Eternity had more interesting dynamics, and those weren't particularly.
They were decent. They were okay.
Yeah.
So here's my thing on it, which is that the racing wouldn't work if you didn't have something to hang your emotions on. So to describe the characters and story as not working or being completely empty would, of course, be wrong, which isn't what we're saying. I think we're saying that there is an arc to all our characters. There is character to all our characters, but it's one-dimensional. It's flat. Eva Marie Saint gets a little bit because she's a career woman in the 60s, and that's kind of interesting. And,
but that gets dropped almost immediately.
It gets, there's like this, there's the question of what the two of them are going to do after the season is over. But then, and again, spoilers for Grand Prix, Jean-Pierre Sardy dies.
He goes flying through the air.
Yeah. And I kind of like that arc, but again, I wanted it to be more than what it is. There isn't the nuance there that a 3-hour, epic movie about racing kind of, it leads you to believe it's going to happen. And I believe the movie is like the way the movie is set up, that it's setting itself up to be that kind of movie. It just doesn't really actually achieve that at the end. So the racing wouldn't work if you didn't have those elements, like the part about, Sarti being at the end of his career. I forget the name of the character, but the younger racer being at the start of his career.
Nick is his first, yeah.
The Englishman who's injured and trying to come back, and then Paul Aaron who just wants to win. Like, those are all really interesting things you could sort of play with. It's just
they're also super stock, though. Like, the way you just described it is like...
No, they're, again, stereotypes. They're archetypes. They're one-dimensional. They're flat. So, like, I like the idea of exploring... Like, a movie might explore one of those characters, but a 3-hour epic about Grand Prix racing could explore all four of those characters in a deep way. It just doesn't. And so, in a way... I really liked all the racing, and like you said, the split screen and the way it's shot, and even a lot of the way the characters are interacting and how they shoot those scenes, and how we always see Scott Stoddard in a room because it's all about him being confined and his injury and like that kind of stuff. There's some visual storytelling that's going on that helps, but it doesn't deliver on what it promises other than the fantastic racing shots.
Yeah.
Also, I had this weird moment where I was watching it and Jill, my girlfriend, started talking about Cars 2 because Cars 2 takes place in some of the Grand Prix racing stuff. And I'm actually now curious, thinking on it, I'm like, I wonder if Cars 2 was referencing Grand Prix at all. Who knows? But yeah, it doesn't quite deliver on what it promises, even though the racing is great.
Something like The Right Stuff, which is about the early years of NASA as it went from
such a messy movie, but I'm sure you're about to describe as
but
being
I mean,
more...
But the messiness is even, like, I would have preferred a messier story with Grand Prix because, the women in The Right Stuff are mostly their wives, of these experimental pilots and so on. But, like, they're so much more interesting and so much more, like, depth and different ones are having to deal with different things. Like one of them has a husband that cheats and one of them has, a very dedicated husband, but she has a stutter. I mean, and these are based on the real life astronauts. Astronauts. So
it would make the racing, the part of the movie that I like, it would make Grand Prix worse if it spent more time on the characters, because I like the racing elements so much. But to achieve what you're talking about, which is really probably what the movie needs to be better, is to add in character moments and spend less time on the ballet and stuff like that, or change how it's doing the character moments it's doing, or intersperse them in the racing a little better.
They had a lot of character stuff in Grand Prix. They spent
maybe
the whole movie is 3 hours.
It would need to be rewritten or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, completely. You couldn't. What I want to say more is like, so you know, one of the things I don't like about biopics usually is that they flatten someone's life. They take a real interesting human being and like give you like a Cliff's Notes version, a simple version. But something I like about The Right Stuff, I'm sure it's completely inaccurate at times, but is that it's still very messy and complicated the way real life people are messy and complicated. But Grand Prix has that feeling of a biopic, even though it's not, where it's like, here we've just like flattened the characters as much as possible and made them really simple, when really things are, it's like Yves Montand spends the entire film just being tired and depressed and like, you know, it doesn't go anywhere. I mean, it goes the only place it can go, which is him dying a fiery death while Eva Marie Saint like sobs at the camera. It's just very like.
Yeah, I wish. I actually didn't realize that's where it was going to end. But the moment it happened, I was like, oh, duh, of course that's where it has to end. That's the only place it can go. Yeah. I just didn't realize it until that moment. I do like that one of the things I think it does that's more interesting, it is probative and maybe a little critical. Critical might be the wrong word because it's still glorifying and romanticizing things, but it does feel critical of the culture that surrounds Grand Prix, because the part of the movie is about like, there's all this death and injury and stuff. And it's kind of like, is this really, you know, should we really be doing this? Is almost what it's saying.
Yeah. Yeah, and it starts with Eva Marie Saint asking the Yves Montand character how he can just go on when people have died during the race. And he says, well, you just get over it. And then he dies at the end. And she's like,
well, it almost, what it actually says is, he says, well, what everybody else does is they took their foot off the pedal. And what I do is I push down harder. And
that was a good line.
Right. And it's an interesting place to start. And it promises something. It just doesn't really deliver on that.
It doesn't go anywhere interesting. It kind of just goes where it goes. Yeah. And But I mean, I still thought the Grand Prix, the filmmaking, that was amazing. It's too bad that the characters are just so whatever.
Yeah. And I like visual stuff more than you. And I think I got just a tad more out of the characters than you did. But but as you say, some of what I got out of it was the idea and not what was on screen.
Well, and there was also it was very international, which I have nothing against, I like, but they had Toshiro Mifune start speaking English, and we're not sure if he was dubbed or not, but even if he was, you know, dubbed with someone else, they were speaking it very slowly. Like, the point is that he actually knows English and is pretending like he doesn't, but it's clear whoever's speaking the English is just kind of speaking it phonetically. It doesn't sound like someone who knows English. But then you also have Antonio Sabato and his girlfriend character who's French. I forget. I had her name up a moment ago. And Francois Hardy is the actress who played Lisa. And, you know, and they're speaking together in English, and it's not to be like, I would rather see subtitles, because it sounds like non-native speakers being given lines of dialogue written by native speakers who think that non-native speakers speak very stupidly, honestly. And that's not really how non-native speakers speak. Like, they actually have interesting speech, they have interesting ways of talking and so on. Like, it's not like they talk dumb.
Yeah.
Well, but it's also it's a little slow and stilted, and it would have been fun to just hear them speak in French. I mean, Yves Montand gets to bust out with the Italian at one point, and it was fine. They didn't even subtitle it. We got the idea.
Yeah, I wish they didn't. I think movies in the 60s and 70s did this a little more than we do nowadays. Maybe it has to do with the technology, but there was just enough ADRing in Grand Prix that was annoying. Mm-hmm. And actually, you reminded me a different point, but connected. You know, I'm a little more critical nowadays of what coding there is and what we portray of foreigners on screen. And so Sarti is this aging Frenchman, and he's portrayed a certain way, and so is his younger cohort who's just living in life and da-da-da. And it's like, you know, I wonder like what are we saying here? You know, what's being coded here? But even more than that, Toshiro Mifune is once he's not on the track at home, he's walking around in traditional clothing. He's wearing a yukata, I guess it is. I forget what that's called, a kimono. And so are, I think, his assistant and his wife. And I'm thinking about it, and I'm like, this is the 60s. It's not that nobody would wear that, but most of the Japanese movies I've watched in the 60s, they really only wear that stuff on like very specific occasions. Like Mifune in all the Japanese movies, which are mostly the 50s and 60s, is wearing a suit and everything. So would a Japanese businessman in the 60s be wearing that? Or is that something he's wearing because Frankenheimer thought it was interesting? Again, I'm not Japanese. This is more nuanced than there's stuff here that I don't know. I'm just critical of that because...
and we've watched now two... Well, for one thing, the English part is difficult too because he's so sexy when he speaks Japanese. Yeah. And I understand the difficulty is they don't want him having a translator the entire time because his character is so tied into James Garner's character, and James Garner can't speak Japanese. It wouldn't make sense for his character.
Yeah.
So they're doing it to cut corners, but it just kind of makes it not make sense. But we've seen Mifune now in two, I guess they're international productions, you call it, Grand Prix and Red Sun.
Yeah.
And it was like, both times you kind of feel like they just don't know what to do with him.
Yeah, they have no clue.
And it's like in Kurosawa and other Japanese directors' film, he's a man, and he's a man born and raised in Japan in the Japanese culture, but he is a man. But in these international films, it's like, it's the issue you get with most minorities, where it's like, he is a Japanese man. And it's like, here he is doing the Japanese man things. And it's like, you get so sick of like hearing about honor or stuff like that, where it's like, yeah, that's part of it. It's so unnuanced. It's so...
Yeah, well, and the part of me, because I know just a little bit about Mifune's career, in 1965, when Redbeard came out, which is a Akira Kurosawa movie, because of how that movie was filmed, and because Mifune had to keep his beard for while it was filmed, and it ended up running over in long periods of time, they had a falling out because it sort of made it so Mifune couldn't work in other movies because having that beard just wasn't a very sought after thing in, I guess, movies there. And so Grand Prix is 68 and Red Sun is 71. And this is the later part of Mifune's career anyways, where I'm sort of wondering, like, did he sort of stop working with Kurosawa and go on to do international pictures, A, because he was famous because of Kurosawa, and B, because he'd had a falling out with Kurosawa, he just decided to seek other avenues. And Kurosawa himself kind of didn't do as much work after Redbeard anyways, because Redbeard wasn't a financial success. But so I'm just curious, like, if that's what led to this, and then with that being what led to this, everybody, the people who were working with Mifune were like, oh, it's great to have Mifune. You're a Japanese guy. And that's kind of all they knew to do. Right.
It just feels like the flattening that we're seeing with all the characters, So, that Mifune, who we know can play really complex, interesting characters, is just that Japanese guy to a degree. Yeah. And Antonio Sabato is that young Italian guy, and Yves Montand is that older French guy. And they get a little more to do. I'm overstating it a little bit, but Mifune actually probably gets it the worst of all of them.
He gets it the worst, yeah. Maybe other than like Lisa. Lisa doesn't really do much.
No, it's kind of cute. It's kind of cute the way her character gets picked up twice, but man, that argument between her and Antonio Sabato was just so poorly written and just not very interesting, and they're both speaking just stilted English, and it's
I like the moment where she she drops him after that argument and goes to be with the guy on the beach, and the guy on the beach is just laying there, and she's looking at him, and it's like, oh, this is boring. Yeah. Like she's not with our driver now because he was a shit, but this is boring, and it's like, I wish there was more moments like that in the movie where it really felt like it was doing a thing.
Yeah. Anyway, I think, Grand Prix, it's definitely an interesting movie. It's a long movie, and it's not very well done as far as characters go. So, I mean, that's kind of it.
Yeah.